Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 553 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Arestovich, and in this new format with Yuri Romanenko and Nikolai Feldman. Today they address the successful attacks of Ukraine on Russian military bases on the territory of Russia, and a situation on the front where big changes are coming. Special thanks going to Anna L. today and to Bill. Thank you guys for your kind support of our channel. Also, hello, ex-Gaidamak and Andrei Patinko, new members. And with this, let's deep dive into day 553. Enjoy. Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. War Diary is in live stream with Alexei Arestovich. My name is Nikolai Feldman. We're streaming on Alpha&Omega, on Alexei's channel, and on Yuri Romanenko's channel. Yuri is also with us here in the studio. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, guys. A lot of news today. I think one of the main ones is an attack on Pskov and the airport. Nikolai, not only Pskov, 7 different targets this night. This is the biggest attack on the Russian Federation military targets since the beginning of war, and we do not know how regular these attacks will be. But even if it'll be somewhat rare, it still represents a new level of this war and new level of low of military capabilities for the country, such as Russian Federation. So, by the way, speaking of Pskov, Pskov has the 2nd Brigade, has special forces there and paratroopers. And what was hit, the targets of 2nd Brigade of Special Forces and military transport aviation for paratroopers. And many Russian public sources already comment that these planes were not empty, they were loaded. What they were loaded with, we don't know yet, personnel or equipment. But since they were moving things down south using these planes, then could be loaded with personnel. So this is an outstanding military success. And there was also attack on some targets in Crimea, and naval UAVs also attacked some targets in Sevastopol and Crimea. So there were about 8 different targets, different regions that were hit. And now we can say that Russia, with their level of current military, are incapable to protect all these targets. So right now, it's really up to us to have enough means to get to them, to attack them there, so we could actually destroy their targets. We often complain that we don't have enough air defense forces, but their territory is humongous, and it's easier for us to hit them than for them to hit us. And by the way, the drones flew for about 700 kilometers to their targets, and so that there were no other stories that they flew from Baltic countries, they didn't. And they hit Kursk, Bryansk, Ryazan, Kaluga, Moskva, Lyubertsy. These are regions that were hit simultaneously. That means no air defense systems can protect those bases, and they need to react. So that means that they will need to withdraw some of aerial defense from the front line, and that means it'll give us more breathing room for F-16s that we'll acquire soon. And we basically got strategic opportunity to hit big warehouses on the territory of Russia and their airfields. We destroyed 4 strategic transports and reportedly a bomber in Pskov, strategic bomber. And this is a big achievement. They don't have many of those. Putin depends a lot upon his people. It's a very tricky codependence, because he can, of course, mobilize thousands of people to the front, but he does need to keep explaining why and what is happening. And we actually saw Peskov coming out trying to plug the holes in their PR and explain why they're fighting in Ukraine, but the targets are burning in Russia. And they need to keep answering that. That's what they will continue doing. They need to answer to their citizens in Moscow and major cities why during this week so many targets were hit in their area. Even their propagandists are now wowing, saying, "What's going on? The UAV was shot right next to my house," Simonyan said the other day. So what we're saying here again is that this game will not be the one where Ukraine is only defending. We are now gaining capacity to destroy military targets on their territory, and our capabilities are increasing. We are growing. And Ukraine, of course, we are in a difficult situation. We are missing in terms of some nomenclatures, but we definitely are not toothless. We're not just patiently taking all the hits. We will be increasing our hits on the Russian military targets. And as a result, I think skepticism on the West will also decrease as to the probabilities of the outcome of this war. And the third effect is the effect connected to Russian troops and position of Russian troops and their expectations with Russian society. Because the army that cannot protect their own territories, their own homes, basically is an army that you cannot trust. It's also reflecting in politicians whom you cannot trust, who started this war. And that's why politicians will have to react and do a lot of interesting motions, such as withdrawal of aerial defenses from the front. They'll have to deal with a lot of things, trying to correct the course, and they usually correct the course in some dumb way, which will again benefit Ukraine. So one can say that starting this war, Ukrainian and Russian war has transferred to the new stage. We don't know details, but now we actually at least know that we can attack 7 different regions in Russia simultaneously with high-precision weapons. And one can say, by the way, those citizens in Russia who are complaining that the shot-down drones are falling on your heads, we need to remind you that the Ukrainian military is not fighting with civilians. We're only attacking their military targets. So when your aerial defenses shoot down our drones, and they, as a result, fall on your commercial or private or other targets, then you guys have to turn to Putin and to your powers so that aerial defense would stop shooting them over your heads. Talk to your Putin, talk to your others, that your air interference and your aerial defense do not shoot them over your locations. Ukrainian army is a civilized one. We are aiming only at military targets. On occasion, they can shoot us where we fall, where it falls, but these problems are due to your aerial defense, not because of Ukrainian army. It is your defense that is shooting them in the place where it hits you. Otherwise, it would have reached the target on the airport airfield belonging to military. Okay, quick detour. Please do not forget to click like, subscribe for all channels or wherever you're watching it. If you're watching that in English, do that to the privateer station. And question to Alexei. What Russia is talking about? They actually remained mum about Pskov. They did not even tell that we hit anything there. Well, yeah, it was the governor of Pskov region who came out and said what was hit and what happened. And that creates another interesting question. Does a local civilian government have to explain the errors of the federal government, their military errors? That only shows the incapacities of Russian power, and they're being slowly growing. This is not a single thing, and the whole country will not revolt after this attack, but it's growing. And, you know, one day there might be a little feather that falls down and breaks the back of the camel. And this also breaks apart some of their prestige and their military flair that they used to have before, because it is very difficult now to explain Kazakhstan and other countries what can you do. Because it's actually Stalin's dilemma, the question that he posed to his opponents: if you cannot defend yourself, whom can you defend? Because you can promise whatever to those countries, but they can come back at you and say, well, you cannot defend your own airfields, you cannot defend your own territory. What are you talking about? Right, and there is also a new wave of hysteria from Russian propagandists. Today, Solovyov came out and said, we will grind Baltic countries to nothing and will flood you, we don't understand in what, but he was very upset. And by the way, that's another bill for NATO countries that, given the opportunity, Russia will find a way to attack you. So, guys, yeah, don't pacify them. They definitely, current administration in Russia is definitely hawkish and they want to attack you. And as for the Russian citizens, continue turning to mayors of your cities and to your governors so that aerial defenses do not shoot our drones over civilian territories, over civilian targets. Well, that's Russian story, right? Prigozhin brought out some problems to light, and what happened to him? He was assassinated. So, in order to not be in that situation, continue helping our military forces in Ukraine. Everybody understands, nobody can agree with Putin. The whole world now understands Putin is an unagreeable character. Look what he did with Prigozhin. And yeah, the whole world needs to support Ukraine as well. The more you help us, the more we destroy Russian threats and their troops and military capacities here, and then you guys are living in a safer world. East European and Baltic countries, they understand these situations pretty well. I'm talking about the other allies who like to discuss, to meet, to talk about negotiations and peace talks. I'm addressing those. There actually is a good example of some European countries that came with new initiatives. Romania and Netherlands came out with another initiative to create training facilities for pilots of F-16s. Netherlands officials came out to confirm that, and what they're saying is that Netherlands feel it is important to demonstrate our support, our unwavering support to Ukraine during this aggression from Russia. And now we're signing agreement with Romania that we will be providing training for F-16 pilots. Remember, so many talks about Romania, about Bukovina, about Romanian passports and Russian influence there, but as it comes to a real fight, a real situation, then Romanian people are aware about the risks. There are those people next door to us who support us in the key elements, creating aviation coalition, without any question, without any qualms. Of course, we will give it to you and we'll train your pilots. These countries get it. This shows once again that a serious element of our politics should be the best relations with our neighbors. We don't have to explain them what Russia is, what risks of Russia are. They understand all that themselves. And they are helping, and they're glad that Ukrainian military is removing the main military instrument from the hands of Putin. We're destroying this instrument as a tool. This is the unique chance for the whole West, and I'm surprised that most of them are still not getting it, that this is the unique chance of them to get rid of Russian threat on this side. There are some other news about European countries and neighbors that we also want to talk about. Hungary. Orban, the head of government, in the interview to Tucker Carlson from the US, a well-known journalist, he insists that Ukraine needs to forget about joining NATO, otherwise it means an immediate war for all NATO members. Answering the question posed by Tucker, Orban answered that this historic opportunity was missed by Ukraine in 2008, and right now Russia is so strong that Ukraine cannot join NATO, we cannot go there, we cannot afford to have such a long border in NATO, on the border of Ukraine and Russia. That would mean immediate danger for all of us, including United States. So he is suggesting to negotiate with Russia about peace and exclude the opportunity for Ukraine to join NATO. And we need, Orban also said that they need to agree on the new safety structure and sign some new documents with Russia, but it's unrealistic to have Ukraine in NATO and unrealistic to expect Crimea to be returned to Ukraine. What do you say? I would advise anti-corruption bodies of Hungary and European Union and certain organizations within NATO countries to verify where the proceeds of the nuclear power station contract that Russia signed with Orban went to. And the recent expansion of that service by Russia to Hungary. I think you can find a lot of explanations as to his current position and statements in the details of where do the profits go from, where did the money go from this contract. This position, without any shyness, without any qualms, the degree that he takes it officially, usually means one very direct injection, financial injection from Putin's government. And Ukraine already reacted on this. They highlighted some connections that he had back in the 90s with certain criminal groups back in Russia that were also tied to Putin. And right now, I think Hungarian dealings with RosAtom, Russian nuclear construction company, should be investigated, should come under more scrutiny. And we can bring 3 examples: Moldova, Georgia, and Hungary. Moldova also had politicians who were supporting Russia. Russia annexed part of its territory and now playing their politics. Georgia, Russia annexed part of its territory after certain parties played with Russia and toyed with supporting them. Even though today, now in Georgia, Russian language is not a favorable language, young people do not speak it. Politicians are still doing pro-Russian politics there and right now killing their own president, ex-president, and just drifting further and further in the arms of Putin's Russia. That's what you get with if you continue supporting Moscow. And such a blatant support as Orban is expressing, me being, for example, imagine myself as NATO and European Union, I would pose a question: do we need in our ranks, in our organizations, a group that continuously enforces decisions going completely against the collective agreement of these orgs and going to support Putin's Russia? And perhaps it's time to sanction some elements of Orban's administration, because I suspect he's not really representing his whole country. I don't believe that. And I know that Europe has certain ways to influence him, because when they needed to get his signature for financial help to Ukraine, initially at the beginning of war, they found a lever to press on Orban. But that once again outlines that this world is far from common sense. Very often countries and politicians, they just follow the inertia. And Putin is using that. If there was one good leader in the West, just like Thatcher and Reagan were doing that, or Kohl in Germany, this question would not have even risen. But even with the current politicians and toothless politics of the West and the decisions they make in this condition, we still can succeed. And that's what the map near Robotino can actually show you. Here, a very conservative deep state, which usually posts things after numerous confirmations, they drew another protrusion here on the front that goes as a pincer around Novoprokopovka, which they fortified, and here you can see that we're navigating to the side of it. And also Russia is screaming that there are fights on the outskirts of Verbovoye over here. Here is the first line of Surovikin, that their defense line, which our troops, according to Russian sources, have already crossed, and they already have developed a perch on the other side of it, and we're conducting actions. So Russian troops are failing to stop us for about 2.5 weeks, despite throwing more reserves and throwing 286th Paratroopers Division. They also have big issues. And by the way, the attack on Pskov was not a random thing, because that's where their base is. And these are the transports they're using. So they're failing here. And I don't see them being able to use anything to stop us in this direction. And if they manage to somehow stop us, we can turn the effort on the second and third direction as well. For example, for several days, They're continuously retreating from, let me show you, here in that line, near Velika Novoselka and Staromlinovka. See, they start to withdraw troops further down south. They're slowly retreating to Volodina. This map doesn't show the full scale, but you can, in reality, these diamonds would have been much more south towards Volodina. So they're trying to take the next position to defend. Near Novozlatopol is also not everything is groovy. Basically, they still don't know how to address our military strategy, where we shift efforts from one direction, from one part of the front to another, and if they find a way to stop us in one part, we shift the effort to the other. And I need to remind you that from here to Mariupol is basically 64 kilometers. That's all we're talking about. So it's good perspectives for us, and they have problems on this part of the front too. They are trying to conduct actions near Avdiivka, failing to do anything there. Near Bakhmut, Kurdyumovka, Kleshevka, Andreevka, our troops, despite them trying to throw additional 83rd Special Brigade that is well known, they're contractors, and they were really well prepared. They spent time to train them. They were considered to be one of the main strike forces. They're actually retreating, and they're getting their asses handed to them together with Kadyrov people, and we forced them to leave some of the parts of Andreevka over here. That's according to their data. And if Deep State was not too conservative, one could actually highlight another protrusion or a gray zone over here, which they have lost in the northwest part of Andreevka. So the fights are continuing. We have small but successes. And over here, they started to weaken. First of all, because their main strike forces were removed from that part, 76th Division. One group remained, but two of them went down south. So they're still fighting. They're still, of course, it's not a resort for our troops. It is difficult fighting, but they are not achieving significant successes here, because if you start seeing the weakening of the effort, which already was an unknown and stupid, and this is the first time when they actually start to move troops from different parts of the front, that means this process will continue. That means that reserves in the south are gone. And our troops, symbolically, but still made a symbolic gesture, we planted a flag. We crossed the river and planted a flag on the left bank. And Russians were telling stories that they destroyed some of the boats that were going towards Crimea. It's not a secret that there are some fights happening on the water, and Russia has serious concerns. And our UAV capabilities will also shine brighter in the weeks to come, and you can say also that Western press have actually changed their tonality. They were talking about difficulty for Ukrainian, but they finally started to talk that Russia is facing a lot of difficulties because of new Ukraine capabilities. So Russian ideation on the south was to stop us before we get to those defense lines. That's why they threw a lot of resources, dropped a bunch of minefields, engineering preparations were done along the front. And then they also were throwing troops in the counterattacks here. And the war beyond Surovikin line is very different. There is a much lower density of their troops, much fewer prepared fortifications to repel our attacks. Because over here, it was basically completely fortified area, which was much more difficult to cross. So once we fully reach it, that becomes a really different warfare. We can move faster, their military density is much lower. This is almost getting to this operative range and where you can free maneuver, and they will not be able to hold us. So that's my analysis of the situation. They have big issues on the front now in the south. Okay, once again, little reminder, do not forget to click the like button, regardless of which channel you're using to watch it. Whatever you're using, click it there. And an article. We wanted to talk about the change of tonality in the Western press. Alexei was talking about the changes of some of their impressions and commentary. There were a lot of debates during the last few months that the counteroffensive is slow, that Ukraine is failing, they will not be able to. And during the last week and a half, we start seeing materials that are highlighting successes of Ukraine and telling that it's not so bad, that Ukraine actually has a chance to break this war. And today we are looking at the article by a retired major who is a member of Strategic International Research, Nikolai, and he wrote an article about how Ukraine can win a long war. And he's talking in this article basically addressing the commentary on the West when you speak about 18 months, that everything is slow. Look at what 18 months were for the First World War and the Second World War for comparison. The Allies have lost the battle for Gallipoli during the first 18 months. The fight and Churchill was removed from command. Verdun battle was still going, and after 18 months of the Second World War, most of Europe was conquered by Hitler. Singapore was taken by Japan. United States were losing their battle in the Pacific. And in Ukraine, situation is different. We actually flipped the front. In 18 months, we flipped the strategic success here. Who would have told us 18 months ago that we'll be discussing strategic success of Ukrainian army and retreating positions of Russian army? Nobody. Maybe with the exception of 3 people that are sitting in this studio. So the author outlines that the problems of danger of minefields and fortifications that Russian Federation used along the borderline along the fortification line were not fully explained to the Western population. And on the West, they're already not familiar with such a character of waging war. And basically, he's saying that not everything was disclosed initially, and Ukraine, in fact, is very creative and very successful in the ways, devising new ways to resolve these matters. Because most armies in the West, as he's saying, are actually closer to Ukrainian army than to American army. Because he's pointing at certain successes of the military here, and he's highlighting how Ukrainian army can connect old technologies and old ways with new technologies, and how they invent new ways and basically develop new doctrines for years to come of waging warfare. I actually outlined his conclusions. He is saying the West needs to acknowledge that this war will be long, and acknowledging that, the West needs to say that their goal is a victory of Ukraine achieved through the defeat of Russia, militarily defeat. This is the only way West can undermine the efforts of Putin on this theater. And many politicians were considering that wars between big and well-populated countries can be short, but no, they will not be short. And he also talks that the West needs to standardize equipment and try to standardize the support they provide to Ukraine, because right now it's a hodgepodge potpourri of different pieces of technology. He's basically saying it's better to give a lot of one type of tank than a ton of poorly connected vehicles that are very different from each other. He also talks about the West, that they need to train larger groups of military. This would allow to do proper standardized training. And of course, he is talking about the speed, that the West needs to speed things up. He's referencing Zelensky, who is also mentioning the same problem of rhythm, that speed needs to continue picking up. Ryan is also saying that Ukraine has all chances to win, and it just needs a high-quality surviving evolution. And if the West will be continuing to support it on these key factors, then the victory of Ukraine over Russia doesn't look unrealistic. And that was published in Foreign Affairs. There was a special issue actually published, the one before that, where there were a lot of alarmist moods expressed, but now they have some good optimistic articles being published, which once again outlines that success on a battlefield means a lot. War trumps a lot of politics. Successes in war change the politics of nations. And Ukrainian military forces and defense forces have changed that agenda 3 times. First, when they kicked Russian troops from Kharkov and Sumy, then Kharkov operation, then Kherson operation, and now successes on the front. And I want to talk about some things that are not too popular, and I usually don't bring them up, trying to be more delicate to our allies on the West. So, first of all, do not measure all NATO countries by American standard. NATO is 32 countries, we would have been 33rd. So, with the exception of armies of United States, Britain, and maybe Poland and Turkey, with all respect to France and Finland, the other armies, with the exception of these that I named, would probably not be able to wage this war for longer than 2 months. I'm not even talking about smaller countries, they just physically would not be able to resist Russia, but even big ones, they would not be able to hold it. Due to different factors, lack of military experience, different economic situations, the fact that they were not preparing to that scenario, that's one. Second, even American army would have very big problems if they were fighting in our conditions. Because our army on Zaporozhye direction is doing, not the first time, but is doing an impossible. I remind everybody that even American army never attacks fortified regions of the enemy without total aerial advantage that is already established and guaranteed air, and without having advantage in troops, numerical advantage. Near Robotino, 3 of our detachments are attacking 10 Russian detachments, and according to some Russian media, even 12. So a smaller group is attacking a larger group that has more troops, that has more artillery, and we're winning because due to dedication and the quality of our fighters. And besides our deficiencies in military and other things, we are still showing these miracles on the battlefront. And again, to those who are writing that Ukrainian counteroffensive is slow, unsuccessful, they need to really understand what are we doing. But again, the new general estimate that starts to show up is in favor of Ukraine. And speaking of NATO standards, we are the country that is helping them to come to the same standard. Because we are the ones telling that your different shells that you're making on the West, even being of the same caliber, they do not fit different tanks. Even for a certain tank, the shells of the same caliber do not necessarily fit the same tank. Different modifications, different guns take different shells. Howitzers are also very picky about the types of shells they're using. So now that they're looking and we're highlighting that vinaigrette, that potpourri of different technologies, they actually start to bring questions up that you need to be in alliance with single standard. Because now, within the framework of one army, they cannot get standardization. I'm not even talking about being able to connect 2 armies of 2 different nations. Because 155mm shells for Caesar are absolutely not a match to Crab. And now they're actually having to consider that issue, and now they're talking about it and discussing, and they're adopting programs to standardize their military tools. And this is all as a result of our war with Russia and us highlighting these deficiencies for them, showing them that they're not ready for a big war. Their thinking is about counterinsurgency warfare. Their politics is about counterinsurgency warfare, but they're completely not ready for a big military conflict in Europe. And they're reviewing now these doctrines, and we see that when you go deeper into discussions, that these doctrines are being reviewed very slowly, very incompetently, and when this military professional is talking about the speed and the speed that military professionals are at in reviewing these matters and the societal speed, he again outlines that this war once again confirmed all the classic statements of military arts. Despite of all these UAVs and other new technologies, these are the same core factors, 3rd century BC, 10th century AD, same military concepts, same things that were used over and over again. The experience of the First and Second World War, mobilization of economy, creation of big groups of troops, the use of large groups of troops on the war theater. This general is reminding them, very rightly so, that when the Second World War started, for the first 18 months, the Allies were just getting their asses handed to them. It seemed like a catastrophe. And here they're judging Ukraine with the same 18 months, trying to ask questions, why are you guys so slow? Ukraine is fighting with the second army of the world, or it was branded as such, and we are putting them in the defense position. Russian army is now defending against Ukrainian army and has a lot of chances to lose. And will have a 100% chance to lose here if the support of Ukrainian army will not dwindle. Who of the Western experts who built their entire careers, their scientific military careers on the Russian threat and how Russia is undestroyable, similar to Orban's position. It's not just Orban. That's how the whole society in Europe were talking about. They were telling us at the beginning of war that you'll last maybe for 3 hours? See you guys? And today Pskov was burning in Russia. This is what Ukrainian defense forces, Ukrainian government, and Ukrainian people are doing. With all our strange things, with all corruption and deficiencies that we have, with all things that we are not still building mortars at the desired rate, we are 3 heads taller than many of our allies. So that's back to the question, is Ukraine ready to join NATO? We are ready to join NATO more than 2/3 of NATO countries right now, who were completely unprepared to the most trial, to the real trial for which NATO was being developed, to defend the North Atlantic from potential aggression from the east. So, see, now it's not only you who is talking about that. I was talking about that from the beginning, right? Right now, NATO general is talking about the same thing. And NATO needs, basically is addressing and saying that they do need to reassess their position and their strategies. So there is Europe of different speeds, and there is NATO of different speeds. Military of the old school, they understand everything pretty well. Military of the old school, where you need big groups, big motorized detachments, they understand that this is the core of modern warfare. And they're now actually doing a very active discussion with modern tools and modern types group of military. So they're in discussion of what is effective, what is not. Their authority is growing again, and they insist on reviewing the doctrine and going back to the old positions of military art. Just read them anew. But basically you need strong military industrial complex in order to support a strong army. Because these 300,000 shells that the whole NATO was building in a year, Russia was shooting a month that number. In Popasna, they actually did for a month. In a month, they shelled on our heads the same number of shells that the whole NATO is producing, manufacturing in 365 days. So these are the matters that need review. And as always, nothing happens in the world simply. It's not easy. You need to fight to prove your position. That's always a difficult situation where you need to fight with your opponents. It's an art of argument, art of charisma, art of logic, and debate. And what's good for us is that these opinions finally start to bubble up to serious publications like Foreign Affairs. That means that this fighting is actually showing up in public space. From behind the scenes, it becomes more known. And now they need to also explain to the Western voter that this war is going to be long. It's not a short one. It's not a short campaign. And it's good that now professionals are talking about that, because politicians are not really, even on the West, they're not fully taken and believed. They're taken with a grain of salt. And general Western population is, of course, not happy with having the war on the Eastern Front, but one needs to remind that military-industrial complex is not the weakest part of the economy, and they do have their own interests. And the growth of the orders and production, fivefold compared to their usual manufacturing, also excites them. So they're definitely lobbying. Remember Switzerland that refused to support Ukraine for a while, and then their military-industrial complex said, wait, so everybody is increasing and we're not. So they actually changed political situation in Switzerland to revive their production. And the fact that we are still standing, that we flipped this war, that we are attacking Russian forces now, we actually revived a lot of that NATO bloc. This bloc was slowly dying. It was in a condition that Russia, looking back at China, would often come out and tell NATO, go back to the borders of 91. And NATO had a small budget of less than 2% for most of members, right? And Gabon, by the way, in Africa, had also a coup today. Why is it happening? Because French territories or French-influenced territories, Francophone territories in Africa, they're flipping their position, and they're understanding that France is not a serious country, is not a serious force. So they're realizing they cannot rely on France, and there are other sources of power they can rely upon, so they can kick France out. And this is a direct result of myopic politics of France and their desire to sit on 4 chairs of trying to lie to yourself and the voters and toying with Putin and all these terrorists. So what's happening in Africa? Niger, Gabon, and the rest, they're also connected to Russia-Ukraine war. Everybody is looking at us here. BRICS has started to turn from economic bloc into a political bloc. Why? Because of the war in Ukraine. They understand that the West is weak. And these things will be happening, and there'll be more. And a lot will depend upon the speed that the West will modify itself at. The borders of the world, the understanding of the processes, the understanding of what's capable and who has the real power. Those who will be able to make decisions fast and take power, they will be rising. The ones like France, with all my love to France, I love that country, they are losing now. And even within the NATO framework, there'll be different countries. Some of them will be successful, others will not. And there'll be countries like Hungary, who is a part of NATO and who's going down and who's toying with Putin. And then there is Finland, who's actually growing up, and Poland, who's rising. There'll be an interesting inner bloc diplomacy discussion there. Because I suspect nobody wants in European Union, France, to lose in Africa. That's part of their economic factor, part of their economic power in Europe. So these are tectonic processes that are rising up. And here we, as bearers of a rather unique experience now, who are providing historic capabilities for NATO and European Union, we actually can use our voice and speak up, which we're usually rather shy to do. And we were sometimes barking at certain decisions, but now we can speak systemically. We can outline the deficiencies and show, hey, these are the things we have showed to you, that these need addressing. What are you doing about it? And that's not a simple situation, but not a simple example, but basically, our conversation with NATO. What do we do when our tankers and Leopards pose a question? What do we do when we have landmines in front of us? And NATO advisors are telling, well, you just go around them. He's like, yeah, right, go around. We've got 50 miles in both directions of these minefields. How do you go around that? But another example was during the first phase of this war, 2014. So yeah, NATO folks were telling us, when you get wounded on the cross section, you basically, if you have wounded people, you just stay there, call for the helicopter to evacuate. And our military were looking at them and thinking, are you nuts? If we're staying there for 10 minutes, mortars will completely destroy us. So you need to grab your wounded and move. And heli would probably not be available anyway. So we are changing their experience. We are changing the paradigm. And this is the capital that we are acquiring. And we are the carriers of that experience. We also need to still learn how to use it and how to share it with our allies. And we also need to learn how to maneuver in our political relations, including France. We should have helped them to understand the risks. Two more news that just popped on the stream, and I think they deserve to be discussed. Attorney for Igor Girkin, Strelkov, Igor Girkin Strelkov, he was being transported together with Ukrainian citizens in the same transport who were fighting under Mariupol. So they basically, his attorney is now screaming that this endangers his life, but even Russian guards are now apparently making his life miserable by putting him with Ukrainian prisoners of war. But that's an interesting news, right? How many times did he accidentally bump his head in police transport? Yeah, right. Some irony. And now a news without irony. Russian Volunteer Corps commented about another successful attack in Kursk region, conducted together with Ukrainian intel. They walked, and I'm quoting, through the hole-ridden Russian border. We destroyed military targets. We destroyed air defense systems that was covering some parts of the front, but they're laughing at the effectivity of this air defense system. They only shot once and hit a building in Kursk because they were trying to shoot the UAV, Ukrainian UAV. They instead shot the building. So they destroyed some of these. And by the way, did you notice, guys, that we even taking the media initiative, that Russia is not capable not only defend itself militarily, but also is not capable to hold the media line. And, just 5 kilometers on the front is once again causing changes in rhetoric. This is a good example for our viewers to show how successes in war changed global agenda, both in Russian Federation, our enemy, and the agenda of our allies, and the change of opinions, and how some politicians who are supporting Ukraine, they're going up. Just like the general, he said, I told you that Ukraine will stand. And the others who were holding a different point of view are weakening, and they're losing their influence. And people who are saying that it's useless, Ukraine will not hold, Ukrainian soldier is acquiring that on the battlefront, with their arms and legs, grenades, machine guns, in the most difficult conditions. They're not really, this dependency is not really visible in the peace times, and that's why politicians would love to cut some budgets and shrink the military effectivity during peace times. But during the times of war, only professional historians can capture this situation when these tectonic changes happen in the world and how they unfold in the world just because a certain village was taken by military on the front. So take a note, Ukrainians and the Westerners, those who are watching us in the West, that if you're not investing in your military, you may have to face tectonic changes inspired by your enemies, not yourself. The armies of good, powerful states actually preclude your foes from affecting you. And if you do not invest in your military, then you have to follow Putin and the others and talk about, well, we need to agree with that villain because we're not capable of winning over it. And by the way, those people who are supporting saving money on military, people should take notice of these people. The brightest example was on the eve of Falkland War, when one of the socialists who was about to cut the last British aircraft carrier It was just the political decision was made. They just technically haven't started yet. But their position was so difficult that they needed really some vessel to get there to Falkland. And that aircraft carrier did play a very important role in Britain winning. And Britain was cutting, shrinking, and destroying their military in that time. And once again, high note, never ever go into this again. As long as there is a threat, as long as there is a political threat from your foes to your future generations, to your kids, never ever agree to cut military expenses. This is what they're for, so that you can actually resist when big foes arise. The whole West were eager to agree with Putin to play these games with Orban and Putin only because we could not cross that line. But now, since they've crossed it, we've breached that first line of defense, the tonality has changed. Now NATO doctrine is changing. That's how it works. Imagine what will happen when we get to the sea. And the other articles that Ukraine can win, there'll be a strategic change, and maybe we can destroy Putin militarily. You know, these are exact connections between the events and the global political agenda. In the triangle, United States, China, and Russia, just because Ukrainian soldiers are successful on the front. This is how you resolve it. Do you want a cascade of difficulties and troubles? Just don't support your military. Okay, let's touch upon one more thing, the situation with police that we talked about, because that is related to the stability of the country. This is about the relations between different institutes and institutes of power in the country, and how people work, how politics and society works. And we could see some videos popping up of the incident, how when a Ukrainian policeman shot a driver, and basically the guy who was shot, he was the driver. He then changed seats with his wife or passenger, whoever, his wife was there. And in his blood, they discovered enough alcohol, an equivalent of a whole bottle of vodka. And police officer had to shoot him, and there was a lot of commentary on the social media trying to defend that person, that police did not have right to use arms against that person. Let's take a look at the documents. Article 146 about national police. Let's go through that. For the main problem that people are screaming when they're saying that police killed a person, that it was not rightful use, that he had to shoot in his legs or in the air. So basically, if somebody is resisting arrest and police has arms, a firearm in his hands, so Russians will have to hold here. I'll speak in Ukrainian. Basically, if a police officer is trying to arrest and work with a person who is resisting arrest while police is armed, police has a right to use these arms. And in case there is a risk for a police to lose his arm in the struggle with a person being detained or being arrested, police has rights to use this arm. And they were trying to arrest this guy. It tells police to stop this citizen from piloting a vehicle. So they need to stop his vehicle. They need to get him out of the vehicle. And they were trying to pull his wife out of the vehicle again because they needed to figure out which of them is drunk and who of them is driving. And second, he used the gun only after this fellow, his wife resisted arrest. This guy broke a bone and broke a nose of his partner. And he also attacked and used some martial arts maneuver on this police officer. It's not even an attempt to shorten the distance as the law outlines when you can use the weapon. His partner was already on the ground. She got her nose broken and she was incapacitated. So he had to use at this point, and he used it. And now there's screams in the society that some people are supporting the killed drunk driver. And by the way, today I've seen that his wife now is being criminally prosecuted with possibility of an arrest and jail time for 15 years because she was actively resisting arrest and she fought with police. Police did right. And they had a lot of reasons to, in my opinion, to be much harsher from the beginning. And they are trying to not do that initially. Because again, I'm reminding you, on the video you can see she's probably with a concussion lying on the floor with a broken nose, his partner. Her weapon is accessible to that thug. He could have just picked her weapon and start shooting at the second policeman. So that's where he could just pull the gun and shoot him. You can shoot the violator when he shortens the distance between himself and police. And here it's already an active fight with damage. All that active behavior can be equalized to an attempt to cause physical harm to a police officer, to take his arm. So no questions to that. Of course, we are sorry. People should not be dying in front of their kids in the car, even these dumb people as these two. And we have enough casualties during war, but police officer followed the law, and I support police in this case. And so-called violators, so-called because they are still, the court hasn't concluded yet, I think they need to be punished to the highest degree, because right now we are living in the world where government needs to reinstate their monopoly on enforcement. So this fellow sat behind the wheel being really drunk with his wife and children, endangering themselves and other people. There were a ton of ways for them to stop and to not escalate. So that fellow was going into the catastrophe scenario step by step, starting with don't drive when drunk, right? Many things will not have happened. What led to this? So in my opinion, that's fully on his shoulders, on the shoulders of the guild. And I think we should not be encouraging those people who decide to follow into the funnel of catastrophic decisions. We should be punishing these situations to the hardest extreme so that people would think next time that this scenario of behaving will not work. And any other drunk driver or anybody who will face police officer or military officer will think twice or thrice whether to use arms and to use physical force. And that's important. That's an important educational element for the society. The behavior and everything, they are depending on these things. People often fall into doing evil things if they're not resisted, if we do not stop them. One more thing, CNN leaked an information and they're pointing finger at John Kirby and saying that Russian Federation turned to North Korea and Iran for weapons and ammo, and they're conducting negotiations between Russia and Korean Democratic Republic of North Korea, and they're supposedly discussing artillery shells and the like. This only outlines the complexity of situation that the second army of the world, how they brand themselves, when they have to ask arms from Koreans who often face hunger due to their economy. But I want to say, there are a lot of conversations about that, but North Korea is in the orbit of China. They are dependent on China, so without Chinese approval, they will not supply anything. And China right now is not supplying anything to Russia. There are some gray schemas for dual-use goods, microchips and such, but they're not supplying military goods. And they're not interested in any of their direct allies supporting Putin regime. So I would take that as an element of blackmail that we can pay attention to. But as long as North Korean shells are not really on the front, I think the moment these shells appear on the front, that will cause much harsher sanctions by the West on China and their allies. And China is not interested in that. China is facing a severe economic crisis. This is not a secret. and I think it's a commonplace knowledge now. So right now they're trying to avoid that extra confrontation. Given that the United States and China are both somewhat preparing for a big conflict, and China needs to stockpile some of the military resources, and this war once again outlined that you do need to have enough military resources at your availability. So I do not think it's a real probability that Korean shells will be on the front, but I think it's an attempt at blackmail to influence the Western allies. And if that happens, once again, Russia is trying to pull in more countries into the war. If that happens, that whole situation will change the position of the world. So China understands that. If that happens, there'll be a new stage and we won't be alone. That'll mean the increase of support from our allies. And I think generally, I was expressing this opinion for a while, and us and our allies are ready for that scenario. We've been about an hour live. Thank you to Alexei, to our viewers. Do not forget to click the like button. Please support our work. And tomorrow we start with other streams, and we'll see Alexei, I believe, on Saturday. Yes, Alpha and Omega are some of the best streams, Russian language streams I think you can find these days. And by the way, we're starting to get new merch. See that t-shirt. See you guys.